This video basically is about the functional components of the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. But before going to the main topic, I will discuss some minor details about the nervous system. So this is a basic classification of nervous system in front of you. The nervous system basically is divided into two parts: a somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system is that part of the nervous system which is under your control and you can control it. For example, if you want to move your arm, you can just contract your muscles and move it. But in case of the autonomic nervous system, as the name shows, it is automatic. It is not in your control. For example, the beating of your heart and the peristalsis of your gut, these things are not in your control. The autonomic nervous system further has two parts: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. I am not going to go into the details of these things. Uh, I will have a separate topic, separate video on the autonomic nervous system. Then comes the somatic nervous system. It is divided into central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system consists of the cranial nerves, which are attached to the brain, and the spinal nerves, which are attached to the spinal cord. And the central nervous system is further divided into the brain and the spinal cord, and the brain is then further classified as the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrains. In this video, wherever I will talk about the central nervous system, that means I'll be talking about the brain and the spinal cord. So keep this in mind. Now let's talk a little about what the gray matter is and what the white matter is. For that, we'll have to look at the building blocks of the nervous system, which is called the neuron. This is the structure of a typical multipolar neuron, which has a cell body and the dendrites, which receive the impulse, are attached to the body, and from the body a long fiber, which is called the axon, takes the information and takes it to some other part of the body, to an affected organ or to some other neuron. Now, to understand what gray matter is and what white matter is, we will have to divide the neuron for the purpose of description into two parts: a cell body with its dendrites and an axon. So if the cell bodies collect somewhere, for example, these small dots are represent cell bodies. If they collect inside the central nervous system, I already told you, whenever I'll say central nervous system, it will mean brain and spinal cord. So if the cell bodies of neurons collect inside the brain or the spinal cord, they constitute a structure which is called a nucleus. So there are many nuclei in the gray matter of the nervous system, central nervous system, I mean the brain and the spinal cord. And when many nuclei combine, they form the gray matter. So the gray matter does not have the cell bodies scattered randomly inside it. It has the cell bodies collected in the form of nuclei. So whenever there is a collection of cell bodies of neurons within the central nervous system, it is called a nucleus. And when many nuclei combine, they form the gray matter. Now let's talk about the axons. The axons leave the cell body and they can collect either inside the central nervous system or they can leave the central nervous system. If they collect inside the central nervous system, the collection of axons, these are the axons. If they collect inside the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord, they represent a structure which is called a tract. So collection of axons inside the central nervous system is called a tract, and when many tracts combine, they form a structure which is called white matter. So white matter is basically collection of tracts, and a single tract is a collection of axons. Now if these axons leave the central nervous system, they form a structure which is called a nerve. Now in this diagram I have drawn a cross section of the spinal cord, which shows an oval shaped structure in which there is an H-shaped gray matter, and outside the gray matter, this and this all is the white matter. This is a spinal nerve which is attached to the spinal cord. It has two roots, an anterior root which is motor, and a posterior root, which is sensory. When these two roots combine, they form the spinal nerve, the main trunk of the spinal nerve. And the spinal nerve trunk, uh, as soon as it forms, it divides into anterior and posterior primary rami. This is the anterior part of the spinal cord, and this is the posterior part. So this is a cross section. Now the gray matter is divided into horns. This part is the anterior horn of the gray matter, and this is the posterior horn. Anterior horn is always motor. That means the axons which leave this part, they go to some effector organs and carry out the actions. And the posterior part is sensory. It receives sensation from different parts of the body and different kinds of sensations. And then there is an intermediate horn, or which is also called the lateral horn. This intermediate zone has two nuclei, a medial nucleus and a lateral nucleus. As it is in the intermediate zone, so the one which is on the lateral side is called the intermedio-lateral nucleus, and one on the medial side is called the intermedio-medial nucleus. The intermedio-medial nucleus has internuncial neurons. I will not go into the detail of this, but the intermedio-lateral nucleus has neurons from which the autonomic nervous system starts. Basically, this is the origin of the autonomic nervous system. It can be sympathetic or parasympathetic. I'll go into the detail of these things when I'll discuss the topic of autonomic nervous system, but I'll not go into the detail in this particular video. Now consider these blue structures. I have drawn 3 or 4 nuclei. This is not basically the plan how the nervous system works, how the spinal cord is, but this is just for the description, so you can understand it easily. So each small round structure is a nucleus, and each nucleus has many cell bodies. Obviously, the cell bodies of the neurons will also have axons. These axons can either come into the white matter and collect there. If they collect inside the white matter, it is then called a tract. When many tracts combine, they form the white matter. Now, before going into the detail of the functional components, I will just try to tell you, or just try to explain what a functional component is. So this black structure which I have drawn represents a nerve. This structure is a nerve, and these structures which are of different colors are the nuclei. I already told you what a nucleus is. Nucleus is a collection of cell bodies of axons inside the CNS. So these small round structures represent nuclei, and this black structure represents a nerve. These fibers which are coming out from the nuclei represent the axons of these cell bodies, and they are moving towards the nerve. They are entering the nerve. Now, functional component means the functions which a nerve can perform. And the function of a nerve depends upon the axons which are forming the nerve. I already told you what a nerve is. A nerve is a collection of axons of neurons outside the CNS. So this is a nerve. It has multiple axons, and each axon performs different function depending upon from which nucleus this a particular axon is coming from. Now I have written a few functions of these nuclei. For example, the brown nucleus is performing the function of skeletal muscle contraction. The red one is performing the function of smooth muscle contraction. The green is a sensory nucleus which is receiving pain, and the blue is also a sensory nucleus which is receiving vibration. So that means axons of all these nuclei are inside this particular nerve. So the functional components of this nerve are skeletal muscle contraction, smooth muscle contraction, pain reception, and reception of vibration. So this is the basic plan to make you understand what the functional components are. Now in the next part of the video, I'll discuss the functional components of a spinal nerve. Now let's discuss the functional components of a typical spinal nerve. So this is a spinal nerve, and it has 4 components, and all these components are general. General means that for example, if you consider the sensory components of the spinal nerve, the sensations which the spinal cord receives are all general senses, because all the special senses are located in your face. For example, your eyes, your ears, your nose, and your tongue, which these are all the special senses, and these are not located in any other part of the body. So spinal nerves receive the sensation from the lower part of the body, the part which is below the face. So it will receive general senses, and the motor supply which goes out will also be general. So the components, all the components of the typical spinal nerve will be general. So first we will write general here. G represents general. Now I will talk about the efferent components first, then I'll talk about the afferent components. Efferents are motor. That means efferent means the nerve supply which is going out of the spinal cord is called efferent. The impulses which go away from the central nervous system are called efferent impulses. So the fibers which carry fiber, by fiber I mean the axons. The axons which carry the impulses away from the central nervous system are called efferent axons. And those axons which take the impulses towards the central nervous system, or the information towards the central nervous system, they are called afferent axons. I will talk about the efferents first. So I already told you that the sensations which are received by the spinal cord are always general, and the motor supply which goes out of the spinal cord is always general, because the spinal cord does not have any special sense in it. So first of all, I'll talk about the efferent components. I'll write general because the senses are general, or the motor supply going out is general, and efferents. Efferent means going away from the central nervous system. That means it's motor. So whenever I say efferent, it means motor, and general, you already know what general is. General somatic efferent. Now somatic efferents are those which goes towards the skeletal muscles. So general somatic efferent, whenever the word with this term general somatic efferent comes, that means the nerve supply from the spinal cord or from the brain of it is going towards the skeletal muscles to carry out motor activities. So this component of the spinal cord, its spinal nerve, is called the general somatic efferent. So the motor nerve supply to the skeletal muscles always arise from the anterior horn of the spinal cord. The anterior horn is motor, it carries motor impulses towards the effector organ, the muscles in this case. So the nerve supply which start from the anterior horn, they are always called general somatic efferents. Supply to skeletal muscles. Now the next component are the general visceral efferents. General, you already know what general is. Efferents going out of the spinal cord, and visceral means they are going towards the viscera. So as you know, the viscera are not in your control. The peristalsis of the viscera, the secretion of the gland from the viscera, and the contraction of smooth muscles within the viscera, they are not in your control. So they are considered general visceral efferents, and general visceral efferents will always be autonomic. They can be parasympathetic or they can be sympathetic. So always remember, whenever the term general visceral efferent comes, it will always be autonomic. It can be sympathetic or it can be parasympathetic, and it starts from this part of the gray matter of spinal cord, which is called the lateral horn. So the general visceral efferent supply always starts from the lateral horn. The lateral horn is formed by the intermediolateral nucleus. That means the origin of the general visceral efferent fibers will start from the lateral horn. The lateral horn means the intermediolateral nucleus. Intermediolateral nucleus means there are neurons, the cell bodies of neurons inside this nucleus, and the axons of these cell bodies, when they go out into the spinal nerve, they form the general visceral efferent component of the spinal nerve, which is always autonomic. Now the sensations which are received by the spinal cord, there are of two types. Before starting the afferent components, I need to tell you how the posterior root of the spinal cord is formed. So within the posterior root of the spinal cord, there is a ganglion which is called the posterior root ganglion. This structure is the posterior root ganglion, and it has pseudo unipolar cells. Now, what are pseudo unipolar cells? Pseudo unipolar cells are the neurons which have a single cell body from which one axon starts and it divides into two parts. One of the parts goes towards the receptor, and the other part goes inside the CNS. The one which is receiving the signal from the receptor is called the dendrite, and the other which is going towards the CNS is called the axon. These pseudo-unipolar cells are located in the posterior root ganglion. The cell body is lying here. I already told you what a ganglion is: collection of neuronal cell bodies, the cell bodies of neurons outside the CNS. So as this part is outside the CNS, which is the spinal cord in this case, so this structure is called a ganglion. It has collection of neuronal cell bodies, and the neurons in this case are of the pseudo unipolar type. I am drawing one neuron. It does not mean it has one neuron, it has multiple neurons. But to describe, I just have to draw one. This is the process which comes out of the uh, cell body. It then divides into a peripheral part which goes towards the receptor, and a central part which takes the information towards the posterior root, the posterior horn of the gray matter of spinal cord. So this is how the posterior root, when all these fibers combine, they form the posterior root of the spinal nerve. So the afferent components of the spinal nerve are of two types. One is, obviously they will be general, and they will be afferents. There are two afferent components, general, and they will be afferents. One comes from the skin or from the muscle joints. So they are called general somatic afferents. The sensations which come under the heading of the general somatic afferents are the touch, your pain, temperature, vibration, and the muscle joint sense, which is also called the proprioception. Proprioception basically is, in simple words, if I say, it is the sense of position of your body parts. That if you know where your body parts are located, for example, if you know where your hand is, that means your proprioception is working fine. The other senses which come from the viscera, they are called the general visceral afferents. What kind of senses can come from the viscera? There are pain can come from viscera. Visceral pain is different from somatic pain. Somatic pain, which comes under the heading of general somatic afferents, is a bit different from the general visceral afferents. Somatic pain is sharp and localized. Whenever you get your skin cut or burnt, you can always know where you pinpoint the location of the pain, and you can always see the nature of the pain is sharp and it is always localized. But in case of visceral pain, it is never localized. You cannot pinpoint where the pain is going on. For example, if somebody is having a heart attack, he or she can never say that I am having the pain in a specific point. They always say there is pressure in the chest. So that means the visceral pain is different from somatic pain, and the causes of visceral pain are also different. Trauma like cutting with a knife or with scissors does not cause visceral pain. Visceral pain usually occurs due to two or three reasons. One is chemical irritation. For example, if you take spicy food, it can cause heartburn. Heartburn is basically the pain sensation which arises inside the stomach or the esophagus due to overeating of spicy food. Spices are also chemicals, so it comes under the heading of visceral afferents. The next cause which can cause pain in the viscera is stretching. For example, if somebody has a tumor growing inside the intestine, it will stretch the walls of the intestine and it will cause pain. The third thing is ischemia. Ischemic pain is very uh, rough and very, I must say, excruciating pain. For example, the pain of the heart attack. In heart attack pain, there is ischemia of the muscles of the heart, which causes immense pain. So these are the causes of visceral pain. So these are the components of the typical spinal nerve. One is the general somatic efferent, which is the motor nerve supply to the skeletal muscles. Then comes the general visceral efferent, which is the autonomic nerve supply. It can be sympathetic or parasympathetic to any organ. Then come the afferent components. The afferent components are the general somatic afferents and the general visceral afferents. Somatic afferents are those which come from the skin or from the muscles and joints. And from the ones coming from the skin are the touch, pain, temperature, and vibration, and the one coming from the muscle joint are called the is called the proprioception. And the last component is the afferent component is the general visceral afferent. I already told you what a visceral afferent component. So this is the end of the video. I have completed the functional components of the spinal nerve. In the next video, I'll discuss the functional components of the cranial nerves. I hope you have understood this lesson, and if you have, please like and share this video, and also subscribe the channel, and let me know in the comments below your reviews about this video. Thank you.